Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining this impromptu live stream. Just waiting a couple of minutes for viewers to log on. But the last 24 hours, you could say a microcosm of the last several months as we all navigate unprecedented, uncharted territory. If you followed my live podcast yesterday on this YouTube channel, we had some discussions about the NBA choosing to postpone their scheduled playoff games in support of the players, coaches, and other staffers who felt a certain way regarding the events of Jacob Blake and Kenosha. Today, that expanded. Actually, after we wrapped up the live stream yesterday, the WNBA went the same route, postponed its games. And you may have seen coverage from Holly Rowe, who shared some video clips of a candlelight vigil that all the players took part in last night. They all came together today as they continued their postponement of games. All three WNBA games scheduled for today were postponed. A makeup date hasn't been announced yet. 14 Major League Baseball teams also postponed their games, including the Minnesota Twins, who were scheduled to play the Detroit Tigers. And the NHL, after some pushback, however you look at it, they decided to postpone their games as well. MLS teams did the same thing. Naomi Osaka also dropped out and said would not play a semifinal match of a tournament that she was scheduled to play in. And we're hoping to offer some more clarity, context, and perspective on this in future episodes of our Mic'd Up Sports podcast. And we have a couple of guests who have expressed interest, so we're still trying to nail down a time where we can share those stories. But not going to lie, the cynic in me thought we would never reach a point where athletes would risk multi-million-dollar paychecks, especially with the men's leagues. You know the money they make, the Supermax contracts worth $200 million in the NBA. I never thought they would put their paychecks on the line to take a stand. I guess I was wrong. And you know what? I'm okay with that because I can't predict the future. I can't read minds. But to see such a swift response and to witness how quickly it spread. Of course, we live in a connected world, so to pretend that we're sticking to sports, that may have worked 10, 20 years ago. It's really difficult to pull off now when you have Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, so many ways to stay connected with what is happening in your life, the lives of your friends, coworkers, and what's happening all around us. I'll be curious to see what happens going forward because, as it was stated, the games are being postponed, so they're not being canceled. Presumably, they'll be made up at a later date. And as I alluded to yesterday, from a logistics standpoint, it's not too hard to reschedule games as far as facilities are concerned, because there are no fans in attendance, so you don't have to worry about ticket refunds or concessions, any of the other amenities that usually come with playing games. As I stated before, the NBA, WNBA, and NHL all playing in bubbles, so it's pretty easy for them to make up a game later. But to see them all take a pause to make this kind of statement, I was talking with a player that I've covered over the last few years, and she said it's exciting. She's a big NBA, WNBA fan, and she's proud and said if that's what it takes to make this message clear, to help others understand why people of color feel upset, tired, tense, then she's all for it. Again, we're hoping to offer more context with Mic'd Up Sports episodes, and if we can get some guests who are willing to share their thoughts, or I should say if we can get them scheduled, we will share them here on YouTube, whether it's live or through our format or tape delayed format, where we tape the episode and then I do some cleanup and then share it with the viewers just so it looks a little snazzier. The title of this live post also fits with my current situation, the postponement of sports. Now, to be clear, there are sports happening locally. Today was opening day for a lot of Minnesota high school teams. If you've been following the local prep sports scene in the Twin Cities and in the state, earlier this month, the Minnesota State High School League, the board got together and postponed football and volleyball to the spring. So sports like soccer, girls tennis, girls swimming, cross country are still scheduled for the fall. Many teams had their season openers today. As I understand it, most, if not all, teams are playing a conference-only schedule to limit travel. And the number of games per week and total number of games also trimmed as a safety precaution. We'll see how well that holds up. But the outdoor sports, again, an easier sell as we try to salvage some sense of normalcy, even though we're living in abnormal times, no matter how you try to slice it. So what does that have to do with the postponement of sports on my end? As you know, I've been doing a lot of high school sports for the last decade plus. It's one way I can stay active and get more reps in broadcasting because the opportunities I've had elsewhere with semi-pro and college, other leagues beyond high school have been limited. And I'm not going to lie, it's frustrating. Over the last couple of years, I became a YouTube partner. I also launched a Patreon page to generate more support. And I often pay the camera ops and other crew members out of my own pocket. That's where the YouTube partnership and Patreon contributions help, because that allows me to get the crew I need to broadcast games. Why is that important? Anyone, it feels like this, anybody can do a stream of a high school game, and we've seen that. And we're seeing some organizations try different models, putting up paywalls in one case. The local stations are still moving forward with their broadcasts, and it will be curious to see how this evolves moving forward. I know before the pandemic, a former company I used to work for that did the high school state tournaments switched to a paywall. Viewership dropped, and I remember with another company that I worked for later kind of making a mocking reference to the lack of viewership. As you know, it's a tough balancing act. You don't have spectators, and I imagine advertisers are also more reluctant with current economic conditions. Some parts have rebounded, but unemployment's still high. We don't know what the future will look like, and it's expected that it will take several months, if not longer, for things to return to normal before the pandemic. So you see a proliferation, and not just in Minnesota, but elsewhere, of single camera streams, and it makes sense. It's the most cost-efficient way to produce a broadcast, to reach out to viewers. But when there are so many of them, as we have seen, how do you stand out? Well, I got my start with the St. Paul Neighborhood Network, so I've had a lot of ins with community cable, cable access, however you want to call it. I freelance for a few of those stations, and I'll still get to call some sports with a couple of those stations. So I won't be going away entirely from sports, but it may be a while before you see another sports broadcast on the TSB Television YouTube channel. And I was inspired to be transparent about my circumstances after listening to Logan Anderson, who runs the Say the Damn Score podcast that focuses on broadcasting, not just his own foray into it, but as you may have seen if you follow it, and I'll put a link up in the description with the video that I will share once I clean up some stuff. He's had some prominent broadcasters in the industry come on to share their experiences offering oral history in sports, and that was also the idea behind our Mic'd Up Sports podcast. And Anaya Smith, I'm watching one of your videos right now. Well, I appreciate that. So with the YouTube partnership, what that did last year, entering the school season, was encourage more experimentation. As a lot of you know, most of you subscribe to my channel because you're fans of basketball. And I've seen that, whether it was Andrea Adams at Como Park from all those years ago, who's finishing up her college career at Texas Tech. And we certainly wish her a great senior season after the fallout that occurred regarding the firing of Marlene Stallings and the allegations of abuse that happened at Texas Tech and her prior stop at Minnesota. More recently, Sarah Scalia was another star who's now playing at Minnesota. But when she was knocking down threes at Stillwater, people are still watching those games. And Paige Beckers, everyone wanted a piece of the action. So I've built up a massive following through basketball. Yesterday, I mentioned how some parents, coaches that I've met, players too, they knew who I was long before I knew who they were, because they would watch my games. And they told me one reason: it's hard to find high quality broadcasts, and you set the model. And so that's what I tried to do as a way of standing out against this litany of single camera streams, because I'm hoping that one of these broadcasts could be a calling card to ESPN, Fox Sports, BTN, etc., a larger network in the professional ranks or college that I'm worth taking a chance on. But if the broadcasting side doesn't work out, I also edit all of the broadcasts. So the graphics, the replays, the music, all of the elements that you see with the high school games, I take the time and put that into the broadcast. So you viewers can watch it, even though it's not live. You can get the experience, the thrill, the euphoria of watching a game as if you were tuning into a broadcast on the aforementioned big networks. And that's a model that I hope to continue in the years to come if I'm unable to make any headway in broadcasting or any form of television, sports work, etc. So we put more resources into our product, and the results are hard to argue against. It's surreal to see my broadcast go up against other companies that I've worked for in the past, where we would call a game at the same time. I think it helps that mine is tape delayed, so you don't have conflict of interest to worry about. But in terms of viewership, to get ratings that outperform the live stream, I mean, that says something, that people, maybe they went to the game or they're just willing to wait. And I have to imagine at least a few of my viewers don't live in the state of Minnesota and enjoy easy to find games because of the SEO, the algorithm favorability that YouTube and Google offer. As you know, Google, the parent company of YouTube, and I guess, well, and Google, the child of Alphabet, but I digress. All of that takes time and resources. So I'm often, I have to hire crew members out of my own pocket to provide the angles and viewpoints, the perspectives that make it feel like you're watching a broadcast from home and getting up close access to the players, their facial expressions, their excitement, their angst, their frustration at whatever happens. So I built the brand through basketball, and over the last couple of years, I've expanded to other sports to see what the interest is. Unfortunately, with football and volleyball being pushed back to the spring, as I noted earlier, that leaves soccer, tennis, girls tennis, cross country, and swimming. We have done a few soccer broadcasts over the last couple of years, and the viewership for high school soccer isn't that great, at least on our channel. There are some who have been able to make it work. And I understand soccer, even though it's made a lot of strides with the expansion of MLS, Minnesota, they've had a team now for a couple of years. So soccer has come a long way from even 10 years ago. So to see the interest grow exponentially, it's amazing to see, but it hasn't quite translated to the lower levels yet. And some of that takes time. So the sports on tap, volleyball was my most watched sport in the fall. And there are a couple of games that I broadcast last year that are still, that are seeing an increase in viewership now as interest in the sport goes up. And so before the pandemic, I was kind of banking on that model to create a sustainable and consistent stream of revenue where as each season moves along, sports like volleyball would see a spike in interest in the fall. And I think if there was no pandemic, that would have happened perhaps a little sooner. And then as we get closer to winter, an interest in basketball. And that's not to say people still aren't watching. As I've seen, folks are still tuning in to Sarah Scalia and Paige Beckers long after those games were played. And that kind of staying power has always baffled and flattered me at the same time. And then as we move into the spring, I was building up some momentum with lacrosse. As you may recall, spring sports were canceled, so I wasn't able to broadcast lacrosse. I did get some help financially. I've been mostly unemployed since March outside of some freelance projects, the highlight reels and some other work. And I do have another one in the works that I hope to share with you soon. But it has forced me and a lot of other aspiring broadcasters to look at cost benefit analysis in unprecedented forms. So for soccer, could I cover some games that aren't being streamed or televised? Yes. But based on the viewership data over the last couple of years and the fact that we're still in a pandemic, cases have fallen from their peaks in July, but you never know if we'll get another flare-up as the reaction and the response to this virus is frankly unpredictable. Right now, for this channel and my own well-being, it's difficult to justify going to games as much as I want to call new games, get some more content up there. The return on investment makes it hard to justify risking the health of myself and camera ops who I would reach out to cover a game that doesn't draw in enough viewership to offset the production costs that go into it. Now, I could scale down and do single camera streams like fellow broadcast organizations have done, but even that would still lead to a potential cost to benefit analysis. There's still a risk, even with limited spectators. You know, anytime you venture out, there's a risk involved, and there's a risk in everything. So for now, we are on hold with the TSB television broadcasts until we can get a better sense of where things stand. And the safety plays into that as well. Several schools have either had to push back reopening dates or retool them as more information comes in about coronavirus infections. Rochester Lord had 3 staffers test positive and 3 in close contact. So they had to push back their start date at least a week while they try to prevent an outbreak from occurring. And that just serves as a reminder that no matter what form reopening takes, there is going to be a risk. And so we're on hold for now as much as we can to see what happens with school districts, because if there is an outbreak or if this does get out of control, it's possible or likely to conceive that it would affect the high school sports that are in session right now. That doesn't mean I'm going away from sports broadcasts entirely. I have a couple of broadcasts scheduled with Valley Access channels for soccer, and SEC has reached out to me, so I may do some work with them. And if other stations are in need of a broadcaster for soccer games or swimming or tennis, I'm certainly available. So I'll still be around, but right now, it's just tough for me to put myself and others at risk with a virus where the impact may not be contained to just myself. I might feel differently if it wasn't as contagious as it is, but I've noted this before. It's like playing Russian roulette, and losing could cost you a lot. It could cost you your life, and if it doesn't, who knows what impacts long-term contracting the virus would have. And with my conscience, I know I would feel disheartened, deflated, and upset if a decision I made ended up putting the health of others at risk. Part of it is economical, based on analytics, and part of it is safety. So if you're watching this, I would not anticipate any soccer broadcasts coming from our end, at least this fall. Hopefully, when things get closer to normal, we can get back to that, because I would presume the closer we get to normal, the closer we get to a treatment or vaccine that can help mitigate the impact of this virus, the more excited, the more interest people will have in high school sports and just about every other form of entertainment that has been robbed of us over the last few months. So I mentioned my Patreon account earlier, my Patreon page. And if you're watching this, you're wondering, well, if you're not doing any broadcasts for the time being, what does the Patreon partnership do? Well, it has helped pay for the Zoom subscriptions when I do panel discussions on Zoom. You have to pay $15 a month to have more than one guest on your platform for an unlimited amount of time. And so I had to pay that subscription rate to do the panel discussions on George Floyd. And if we have more topics, whether it involves race, sports, and who knows, as you've seen on this channel, it's Twin Cities Sports Broadcasting and a whole lot more. So we're not afraid to experiment with any subject. Your Patreon contributions help me afford the Zoom subscription that I need to conduct those panel discussions, and it will come in handy again as we continue the Mic'd Up Sports series. I don't know what it will look like, but that is something you can expect to see in the weeks and months to come on our YouTube channel. And as far as our future in sports, we're kind of in a holding pattern. Basketball is our most watched sport. The viewership data clearly supports that. So we're waiting to see what the high school league does for those winter sports. Basketball, hockey, and wrestling are all highly followed sports. Wrestling more of a niche, but you can't discount the audience they get. I've covered the state tournament the last couple of years for Valley Access and Stillwater, and I covered the state championships for the former Grand Stadium operation. And the people that are into it love it. And even if it's not my favorite sport, it's easy to get behind those who are, because there's a passion for it. Unsung heroes, if you will. They don't get the glory that basketball and hockey athletes do. But they're all high contact sports. Hockey and basketball, while the object is not to tackle your opponents, there's a lot of contact, diving for loose balls. There may be some hope. I covered an AAU event a couple weeks ago, and there was a condensed AAU season in the state of Minnesota. And from my understanding, there weren't any major complications in regards to outbreaks. They put in protocols in place. They had running time, and it actually was refreshing to have games done in about an hour with the running time. They would, of course, spend some time to disinfect the floor. They had a trolley system to get fans in and out. We'll see what happens, because with basketball, hockey, and wrestling, they're all played in gyms. So we know that indoor venues are a higher risk than outdoor, but gym sizes also vary. And the discrepancy, the variance is vast. I've covered games in small gyms. St. Croix Prep, I haven't covered them, but I've watched video, real tiny parameters. And then I've been to venues like Farmington, the Lindbergh Center at Hopkins that can hold a few thousand people. The Joe Mauer Fieldhouse in Cretin-Derham Hall, it's a little easier to social distance in those settings. So I wonder what that's going to look like compared to smaller gyms like De La Salle and Como Park and Harding. And I'm just going off of memory from gyms that I have been to in my coverage. How will that work out when you go from the smaller gyms to the larger ones? But we're on hold for now because, again, when you have to pay crew members out of your own pocket and you also have travel costs that go into covering these games, you have to be more diligent with how you utilize your funds. I got some help with the $600 a week payments thanks to the CARES Act, but that funding ran out last month. And as I stated before, I've been out of work for over 5 months, and I've been applying for some jobs within my skill set. And so far, not much luck. I've had applications go unanswered, and it hasn't been easy to find work in this industry. As you know, with broadcasting, sometimes it's about the connections and the networking more so than your experience or skill set. And part-time jobs, at least in this industry, I've been able to find without much difficulty, but anything beyond that is close to impossible at times. And that is real frustrating. And so as a result of that, I got to wait to see what shakes out, because I work a few hours a week for one of the community cable stations doing city council and commission meetings, but my sports assignments from other stations have dried up. As I stated yesterday, I'm not working at my Major League Baseball job this summer. I would have been doing Twins games or would have been entering my third season. And I had some other lines of work that I'm involved in that also aren't there, just because the pandemic has forced everyone to scale back in the interest of safety. I don't know what the future holds, and not going to lie, every night I'm battling internal demons as to what my future holds and if I'll ever get another shot at a high-profile assignment. My history up to this point has been mixed, where I would get some gigs that would last for a while, and that's how the business goes sometimes. It would dry up. Whether it was an all-star event for high school basketball, I covered the championship rounds of a women's professional football league, the Women's Football Alliance, and then they were able to land a deal with the ESPN to broadcast on the Watch ESPN app, which is great, and I am certainly supportive of that platform. One of my broadcasts from the championship was featured in the Born to Play documentary that aired after the producer reached out to me, and I licensed the footage because I thought, well, why not? That was years ago, and if I can help tell a story, if I can help someone else tell a better story, I'm all for it. But all of the connections and the relationships that I fostered haven't translated to a consistent stream of opportunities, at least not as consistent as I hoped. And it's frustrating. It's hard not to get riled up or to feel overwhelmed when I see the work or the opportunities and the developments, the milestones that my colleagues get, while I sit here wondering, what am I supposed to do to convince others that I'm just as worthy as they are. And you don't want to compare yourself. I understand that, because it can really mess with your mental health. But it's hard not to when I'm wondering what more I need to do, if there's anything more I can do to polish my broadcasting skills, my video production capabilities, or just about anything else that I wonder would make me more employable or desirable for recruiters, employers, scouts, people in the positions of power who are looking for guys like me to supplement their organizations. And it's excruciating. I'm in a situation where it's difficult to do the things I want to do because of my limited income. And it's frustrating because one job I applied for, and I didn't interview all that well for it, so I wasn't surprised that I wasn't invited to their position. But there were a few tweets and anecdotes that I've come across that speak to this conundrum, how employers are looking for experience, and it's difficult to gather that experience with high profile entities if people aren't willing to give you a chance. And I was coming across this tweet. This is something I've grappled with as I'm watching colleagues, friends of mine, continue their journeys in broadcasting, in production, in sports, you name it, able to continue the work they're doing. As someone put it, it's easy to get caught up in it, but Robin Thede had said, we all need to expect about 40% less productivity from each other than normal, and yet somehow everyone seems to expect 140% right now. And that's something I contend with frequently. I haven't had work since March. And before the pandemic, you may have read columns about employees reluctant to use up all their vacation time or all their paid time off because they're worried that someone else may usurp them if they were to take time away in an environment, in an industry, a culture that promotes productivity. And it's great. I know it was a thrill for me to get 10,000 subscribers on YouTube this year, even though we haven't had a lot of sports content to offer since February. That was the last game broadcast we did. And so we seem to value productivity at the expense of everything else because we're all trying to move forward, whether it's through our entities like Logan Anderson and Say the Damn Score, and developing an operation where he built a relationship with a couple of schools to do live streams of all their games. I got a taste of that at one of them last year, and again, single camera stream, but got to give him credit to build something from the ground up, something I've tried to do. And it's not easy when there are so many players out there. I don't know what the answer is. And Logan spoke of adversity, and he's dealing with a lot. And I want to extend my support with him as not only he goes through career turbulence, but also turbulence with his family. He's expecting a child, and I encourage you to listen to that podcast. I'll link it in the description once we're done, as a reminder that there's still a world out there, and there are bigger problems, sometimes bigger things than our passions, our own desires. I don't know what the right answer is on how to move forward. I'll continue to apply for openings. I will do the best I can to keep my schedule open to a point where I can still cover games, because I had some parents offer sponsorships through their own accord or through companies they represent last year, and that helped us cover over 30 games. I think we had close to 40 as far as the number of broadcasts we did. I'd have to go back and run the numbers, but it's the YouTube partnership, the Patreon contributions, and sponsorships from fans, parents, coaches that some of you may be among the viewers right now of this live stream or the on-demand version that I will have shortly. You're the reason I keep going with this, even though I would have every reason to say, F this, I'm done. Maybe I'm too delusional. Maybe my window of opportunity has passed and I should move on to another career trajectory. But admittedly, it's hard to figure out how to parlay what I'm doing elsewhere. And it goes back to experience. In an environment where it seems like recruiters, employers are looking for every reason to whittle down their field of candidates or to toss you into the recycle bin. And you just got to keep pushing. As one of my current clients said, it's not a matter of if, but when. It's frustrating to not know when that when will come. But I just keep pushing forward and hoping every new day brings that life-changing opportunity, because I just don't know any other way. And it isn't easy. I've had a lot of nights with heavy heart, heavy stomach, where I have trouble sleeping because I can't get these thoughts out of my head. It's hard for me to just shut down and not think about anything, because I love creating things. I want to go out there. I want to create new content. And whether that's sports or new kinds of topics. And I've wrestled with some ideas on how to retool this channel if we aren't able to provide sports in the short term. And I'm still on the lookout for suggestions, because believe it or not, when I started this YouTube channel, that's what it was. And on the sports front, it's a breeding ground for experimentation to find out what works, what doesn't, what can be retooled. I look at this YouTube channel, the TSB Television YouTube channel, as a canvas. And some would prefer, for branding purposes, to have specific categories. And I'm thinking, well, why not experiment? So in my college years, we tried doing some autism programming. That seems like a long time ago with all the issues we're dealing with now. Autism, sports. I did some things on multicultural identity, and I've tried some other things, other projects, other subjects, and nothing is off the table when it comes to that. So if you have any suggestions for those who watch this, feel free to drop a line, because I have the equipment. I was able to invest in better streaming gear so I can do more of these podcasts and interviews from home. And as I noted before, your Patreon contributions, even though they're not going to sports broadcasts for now, they still have value, because it helps me invest in the equipment to do streams from home, and also to afford the subscription for Zoom or other streaming software programs when I do have to bring on multiple guests at once. It's not what I anticipated. In fact, the last several months, I don't think anyone expected would happen. And I do wonder what my revenue stream, my viewership would look like if things were normal, because up until March, things were looking up. From the year-to-year comparisons, my YouTube channel was getting to a point where it would reach a level of sustenance. Even if it didn't lead to bigger opportunities down the road, it would at least give me enough stable income where I could continue covering sports, keep my other jobs, and kind of build up this entrepreneurial expedition while keeping a foot in the door elsewhere, so that employers don't have to worry about gaps in the resume. That's a discussion for another day. I appreciate you following along with this long-winded pontification. But again, I was inspired by Logan Anderson to be transparent and to let my viewers know that I put on a game face in the broadcasts, and as you've seen, I'm always excited to cover a game, whether it was Paige Beckers at Hopkins, Jalen Suggs at Minnehaha, or some of the up and coming talents like Addie Mack or Adalia McKenzie, who I think will be the senior to watch if there is a basketball season this winter, and the super sophomores that are now becoming juniors. Just so much talent, as Minnesota basketball fans can attest. So it's easy to put on that game face and get excited when you have another opportunity, whether that leads to freelance work with parents or coaches, or whether it leads to someone who's got a connection, or, somebody who knows a guy who knows a guy. You know how that story goes. So on the air, when you watch those games, yeah, I'm thrilled. Who wouldn't be when you get a chance to share stories of the next generation? But away from it, I'm just as vulnerable and volatile emotionally as you might be. And it's difficult for me to share those emotions because nobody wants to come off as dramatic, self-centered, egotistical. You know how that goes. But at the same time, if you don't share those feelings, it doesn't really help anyone either, because no one really knows that you're in need of assistance. And as I've learned over time, the only person that you're really hurting is yourself. These are difficult times, and the short-term prospects don't look all that promising. Let's be real. The hope is that a vaccine comes by the end of this year or early 2021, and that would be a huge step in getting back to normal. In the meantime, myself, like many of you, are trying to balance the need to generate income and the desire to stay safe in the midst of a pandemic. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what things will look like tomorrow. I don't know what my trajectory will look like. There's no telling if I'll be invited back to some of the jobs I held once we get closer to what life was like before the pandemic. And once we do find a vaccine, once we do control and get this contained, we probably won't go back to the way things were, at least not before the pandemic. Whatever this future will look like is going to be considerably different. But hopefully, all of you will be with me whenever that moment comes. So, in summary, if you've just tuned in, on our front, it may be a while before we return to full-length game coverage on the TSB Television YouTube channel, because the sports that are able to play right now don't generate the viewership and revenue streams that would justify risking my health and the health of my colleagues, my work contacts that I built up over the years, who come out and help me cover the games. It's pretty easy work. They don't have to worry about setting up cables, anything like that. I give them the equipment, and I just ask them that they don't break it, and they always deliver. So we're in a holding pattern. We'll wait to see what the Minnesota State High School League Board does for the winter and how that would influence our basketball coverage. And if it is safe to play football and volleyball in the spring, we certainly hope we would be able to bring you some volleyball, maybe some football games, because as I've seen over the last couple of years, our volleyball coverage is now starting to get some traction. And a channel that I watch frequently that serves as a model for what I try to do, CCX Media, their volleyball viewership just amazes me. They've had some games in the millions, but they put in the work to build up that audience. It helps that they have some high-profile teams in there, but it's not all that different from this channel, where I've had longtime fans of Como Park, and I've developed a fan base with Stillwater with the partnership that I have with Valley Access Channels, where I call games to them live, and then I broadcast games, and then they syndicate them. So we're hoping that we'll be able to provide some basketball coverage in some way, shape, or form to continue building the relationships that we have established with coaches, parents, and players over the last decade plus. You will see me on the air if things stay safe, if things don't get out of control. I have a couple of broadcasts scheduled with Valley Access channels, and I may have a game with SCC, and who knows, there may be some more opportunities down the road. So that's what you can look forward to. And we will continue our Mic'd Up Sports podcast series from home, where if you have a story and you want to share it, whether it's regarding the unrest and the unprecedented steps that sports leagues have taken, leading to the postponement of multiple sporting events across every league, you certainly can. Or if you just want to share an oral history about your work in sports, we'd love to have you, because one thing that I've appreciated in my time as a broadcaster and as a writer is documenting history. And that's what led to the creation of the podcast series, even though it won't win any ratings awards. Two of the outlets I wrote for, Full Court and XL Sports, folded up years ago. Their sites no longer exist. You can access them via cache, but all of the stories, all of the memories that I helped create are no longer there. And that takes away a database for myself and perhaps other writers who might want to look up some of the information. I go back to the start of the podcast and the postponement of sports. Cheryl Reeve, vocal and transparent about where she stands on matters of civil rights. And I documented that a few years ago for XL Sports when the Lynx took the lead, wore the Change Starts With Us shirts, and led to a dialogue we had never seen before. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised looking back on it, but it's crazy to think how that was a forerunner to what we're experiencing now. But you can't access that content. So the Mic'd Up Sports series is a way around that. It may not take the shape of long form articles, and I do enjoy writing those. It was always fun to interview athletes and weave a story together through written word. It's no different when I put features together or highlight reels for clients and the companies I freelance for. So we hope to have some episodes of that series for you soon, and we'll continue to do our best to provide you those stories. And we'll see what else is down the road. But this speech, I guess this podcast went a lot longer than I thought it would, but I appreciate all of you who have tuned in to hear my remarks on the postponement of sports. As far as the professional scene goes, we'll see what the next steps are. I feel the postponement of games is the next benchmark in a series of progressively bigger actions that athletes feel they need to take if they want to be heard. And on the local scene, the postponement of our broadcast coverage. Again, we don't have any plans for soccer right now, and that bums me because I got to see some talented athletes, and I shoot some tweets back and forth, pen pals with the parents of one athlete I covered who is supposed to start her varsity soccer career at Notre Dame, one of the top athletes last year, and almost the Paige Beckers of girls soccer, but it's a sport that doesn't have a following. And we hope if not this fall, then next fall we'll be able to bring you those games again, because until I can get that call that will help me level up and go from the fringe, if that's the right word, or the pool of aspiring broadcasters to a position where it becomes a dependable source of income and work opportunity, this is what we have, and this is the option that I have to exercise. And it's fun to meet all of these athletes. And so, as I said before, we hope that we'll be able to bring you that kind of coverage and do so at a level that feels like a game you're watching on ESPN, on Fox, on CBS, that other streaming entities can't do just because of the limitations they have with live streams. That is not a knock on what they do, because I watch a lot of the live streams when I'm trying to get information on teams that I am researching or guests on the Mic'd Up Sports Show. Those broadcasts do wonders to help me prepare for games I'm doing, but it takes a lot of effort. And so until things are more stable on my end with employment and other things, it makes sense to pull back for the time being. We'll see what happens with basketball and if there's a spring season, what that would look like. Again, we certainly hope we can provide you some volleyball and lacrosse. It sounds like some of the spring sports will be pushed back into more of a summer window. Not that it would affect our coverage. And again, we'll have to see if I get invited back to some of these jobs that have been on hold for the last several months as they try to reopen, as demand is still not at the levels they were before the pandemic. And if you want to support our programming in whatever form it looks like, whether it's sports or if you have ideas on ways we can expand our channel beyond sports to continue offering content for viewers to absorb, just drop a line in the comments section or contact me at tsbtelevision@gmail.com or social media at the Mike Peden on Twitter and Instagram. I certainly want to thank every single one of you who has subscribed to the TSB Television YouTube channel over the last decade, and you're the reason I keep doing this. And it's always cool when I talk to athletes and coaches who recognize me from YouTube and they get excited to see me in person. You sometimes don't realize how many people are watching your product until they tell you straight up. So we'll see what the future holds. It's nerve-wracking to say the least, and I don't know how much this podcast will help temper those feelings, but if I don't get them out there, maybe there's someone else who is feeling in a similar position as I am, and maybe they just need that push, that ounce of support that they've been looking for. So hopefully I'll be able to get some more sleep in the days and weeks to come. And I'm still hopeful that someone out there is looking at my content and sees it as the tipping point to reach out and add me to their team. Who knows? But I will move forward as best I can. Thanks for watching.